So, and we do this one, then we have 15 minutes. The other one seems to start after 10 minutes. Is that right? The second, which are on a different link.
Yes, that's right. There's 2 separate links. And yeah, and I don't. And Garlin, will you keep us on time?
Sorry, keep you on time?
Yeah.
I could try to, yeah.
Good luck.
I can pop it in.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, and we've got just 10 minutes in between, don't we? Because I know it's not long enough for lunch, sadly.
No, a quick break and then back to it, and then lunch, I think.
I need to speak. Hello, everybody. Is everybody all right? It's strange, this Teams silence waiting thing. You don't know whether you meant to say anything or just sit like frozen in time. I hope everybody's okay. Enjoyed this morning.
Because I think we've got 25 people signed up, so I was just watching names appear.
Oh, I think I've got everybody on view. Oh, there's 18, Anne.
Is there? Well, that's good. Should we just start then? Because
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's only intros to start with anyway, isn't it?
Sorry, I'm still getting the chat in the one we've just come out of, which is really confusing, isn't it? When you're in, I'm just going to leave the other one.
Yeah, I've fully left the other one. I don't know if that's what we were meant to do or not, but
yeah, I don't know how to leave. I can't leave. How do you leave? Oh, yeah. Right. That's better. I was getting blinked at. It's much better.
Yeah, because it's been very busy chat, which is good, but you can't have 2 streams of chat.
Too much. Shall we start then, Anne? Do you think?
Yeah, I reckon so. Do you want to?
Yeah, it would be lovely if when we do chats, if people wouldn't mind having cameras on, even just for a glimpse, so it feels a bit more human. Maybe that's just me, but it's nice to just have a wave and see faces, even at the start, so we can see who's in the room. Would be lovely. Thank you. That's really kind.
Yeah, it helps.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, so thank you for coming along and choosing this workshop. So it's myself, Dr. Sarah Martin-Denham, Associate Professor of Care and Education at the University of Sunderland, with the delightful Anne Pinney. Anne, would you like to, should we skip to the next slide and do introductions properly, do you think?
Yeah, sure.
And talk about what we're going to be doing. Okay. Anne, oh, hang on, no, back one.
Yeah.
Anne, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Yeah, sure. I probably know quite a lot of you because I've spoken at these events before, and I've been working quite closely with CDC for many years now on trying to improve data on disabled children particularly, and trying to learn from local areas. That all started for me about 20 years ago when I was an Audit Commission researcher and I led the special needs study. It's quite funny, a lot of what we've heard this morning about the system challenges really resonate with what we said then 20 years. And yeah, everyone's been working very hard in between times. So yeah, here we are now. I've really focused more on data in recent years because I was lucky enough to be sponsored by the True Colours Trust to specialise in this area and to support CDC's work particularly. And that is what led me to Sarah's door, Sunderland University, in 2019. But before we go any further, Sarah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm an ex-primary school teacher and ended up at the university, just fancied a change of career, was struggling with some of the difficulties the children were having and really the access to support. So I ended up in further education and then on to university, where I largely do research, commissioned research for local authorities, national funders, largely around school exclusion, so particularly child and parent voice. So I've just co-created 17 films with children and parents who've experienced school exclusion. I'm launching another 3 short films next month with research I've co-produced with children from Ukraine. So that's tended to be my creative arts research has been a focus. But in addition, through and largely actually in 2019, striving to kind of understand better pathways to school exclusion, as one example, through linking often siloed data. So looking how we can link education, social care and health data to really improve lives for children and families. So Anne came up to visit the university in 2019 with an idea that we should work together because our colleague, Dr. Karen Horridge, at the time was a consultant paediatrician, had excellent data, which was well populated and maintained. And we felt that was a really good opportunity to learn from that data. So the other research I do is data linkage research, but mainly qualitative research with children and people from education, social care and health. And I think that sums me up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say, Sarah's being modest there. The reason I came to Sunderland was absolutely, yeah, Karen Horridge. So the best data we've got for understanding trends in childhood disability is the paediatric disability data, which should be being reported within the community services data set, although there's been all sorts of teething issues. That was piloted in Sunderland and South Tyneside, and we're triangulating it with education and social care data, and it's very exciting. And also Sarah had already done loads of really interesting data work to complement her qualitative work around children excluded from school, and some really rich research around that. So Sarah, I'll hand back over to you.
Yeah, just to share some of the projects really. So they started in 2021 with the Life Start, which was, I'm going to get this wrong, it's DULAC, Department of Housing, Levelling Up Housing Communities, I think, probably got that wrong. And this fund really was a real boost to Sunderland and South Tyneside to work together with the university, with a local North East Commission support unit and the 2 local authorities to link data. So to get the school census data set, SEN2 data, children needs census, foster care return and health data sets, and combine those sets to really explore what were the indicators, the opportunities to intervene around school exclusion. So to create, the local authority wanted to create a dashboard using where this data would be fed in, so they could look at population level, particularly around strategic planning and what they could do to improve outcomes for children. My involvement at the University for Life Start was to do a service evaluation to look more in depth at the data, to look at patterns. So what are the opportunities where we could intervene sooner? I'd found this through my qualitative research. I've spoken to about 238 children excluded from school, over 50 parents who've had children excluded from school, and probably about 100 professionals from education, health and social care. And the idea is that we look at their pathways through this linked data. It will tell us so much. I know from the qualitative research, parents will say things like, well, we went to CAMS, I was rejected. So eventually we go to SIPS, we asked for an EHCP, that was refused by the school. And there's just this whole trajectory of trying to get support often and it not happening. So that's the Livestock project. That's ongoing now. That will complete. It was due to complete in April next year, but due to, which we'll come up to, information governance challenges, some successes, but lots of challenges. We have more work to do around the service evaluation for that one. British Academy of Childhood Disability was awarded October 2022. And that's looking at if children and young people with learning difficulties are identified by health, education and social care. So we've got this, I know from my work at the university, which includes training SENCOs, that we have moderate learning difficulty, severe learning difficulty, profound and multiple learning difficulty in education, which is captured in school census. But in health, it's learning disability. So we were interested in, have children identified by one service have they been to another service as well? So have children with moderate, severe and profound learning disabilities had a paediatric disability assessment. So that's what that project's looking to do. So the Livestock project has lots of data sets from social care, education, and many data sets from health that are being pseudonymised and linked. The British Academy of Childhood Disability focuses on social care data sets, school census data sets within the local authority and SEND2, plus only the community services data set. So there's less data sets in that second award there. And then the UKRI Policy Support Fund, very fortunate to have that fund last year, and I worked very closely with Anne. And we're going to talk a bit more about that. It was a very short project, you can see there, January to July, where we made a promise to do 3 quite huge pieces of work, it felt like, in the time frame. And the purpose of that is to inform policy. So we designed a project around freedom of information requests and semi-structured interviews and publications from that. One is published at the moment and the other 2 are currently with graphic design. And should we talk more about the Policy Support Fund as we move on? Because it's coming up.
Next slide, it's probably there.
So I'm just going to get the link to this and pop it in the chat box, if that's okay. Just drop this in here if you want to read this. It looks very beautiful. I've got some next to me there. They're very easy read. They're policy briefs. So this is a policy. There's 3 policy briefs. One is published, which is a link you can see in there. That's free to download and read. And basically that first policy brief there was a freedom of information request to 91 out of 148 local authority areas. And it asked them key questions, which I'm going to read off here because I will forget them all. They were asked, do they link education social care data for children and young people? Which data set do they link? And they had a list there to select from. Which groups of children are local authorities linking data on? How they're using the linked data sets? And do they link local authority with health data sets? And which health data sets they are linking, which sounds like a mouthful. The tracking and recording of responses for that and the integrated care boards, which had very similar questions, obviously related to ICBs and health, was just really challenging to manage. Luckily, I work with Nathan Scott, who's my research coordinator, and he did a sterling job in capturing the responses. We did not have a picture of what was happening across England. We didn't know who was linking local authority sets internally, and we didn't know who was linking those to health data sets and vice versa. So that's given us a real insight, which we'll share with you today. And do you want to talk about the policy workshop?
Sure. Just briefly, actually, because I think the local area research is probably more of interest, but we did a national policy workshop in May, because part of the problem with joining up locally is really nationally things are not joined up and there's not sort of clear and consistent leadership or legislation around this. So we did a policy workshop to try and share some of our emerging learning and understand where officials were coming from and what the barriers were and what the potential solutions were. So that was really interesting back in May. And then I've done interviews with 6 local areas who very kindly volunteered to help us and let us learn from their experience of linking data on children with SEND, but we'll get into that shortly. So should we go on to the next slide? Yeah. There we go. So what we're going to do today is a wee bit of introduction just for those of you who may be less familiar with SEND data linkage, because there's really varied experience of it. And then we'll get into our findings, both of the FOI, which Sarah's told you a little bit about, and then the local area research, which I've been doing. And you will be hearing most of this stuff before anyone else has, because it's not been published except for the first FOI. So shall we go on to the next slide, please, Galen? Thank you. All right, so forgive me if you already know this well, but I've been talking about this for a little while with different audiences, and data linkage is not necessarily well known or understood, and that's part of the challenge. So the first one here is an academic definition, but I quite like it. It's data linkage combines data from different sources that relate to the same person to create a new enhanced data resource. And the idea is that instead of needing to look at things in relation to one single service or one single intervention, we can look across them. So we can look, for example, to see if an intervention in health made a difference in education years later. We can look at children's pathways and outcomes, like Sarah was describing, what's happened to excluded children and who's tried to intervene when, and what are the outcomes. So it really gives us a much richer data picture. In layman's terms, the way it's usually working on the ground from our research is that local authorities and health bodies are using common identifiers like NHS numbers or unique pupil numbers, or what's called fuzzy matching, where you just have a algorithm that matches personal details to identify the same individuals in the different data sets. So, for example, you can pick out children with EHCPs in the health data rather than just having to look at health data on all children. Or you could look at children with EHCPs with a primary need of autism and see what their experience, what their access to CAMS is, or whatever it is. And of course, it needs to be done securely, and consent may be required, although there are clear legal bases. And there's some really good guidance on this from the Information Commissioner. Data linkage is the same as data matching, but not the same as data sharing. Data sharing, which is what government policy tends to talk about, is a much looser concept. It can range from really confidential stuff. So data sharing for safeguarding and in health is about sharing personal records, and you need really strong protections on that. Or data sharing can just be, sharing cohort level data doesn't identify any individual. So it's a much looser concept, and that's what policy tends to use. So we don't always know how specific policy means to be. Which leads nicely to the next slide, which is about the policy context. So there's been actually lots of policy commitments around this, and just picking out a few of the more recent ones. In our world, in the children and young people's world, a lot of progress towards data sharing and data linkage has been driven by troubled families and supporting families, particularly as there was a payment by results model for using a cross-cutting outcomes framework. So there's been a lot of progress through that, and that's also linking with adult data and household data sometimes. The SEND review said quite a lot about data sharing, particularly between health and education, and that's very welcome, because joining up health and local authority data is the really challenging bit of this. And then there's been a whole lot of little commitments on children's social care as well. Josh McAllister's review talked about the need for frictionless information sharing. There's a data and digital task force due to report at the end of this year. And then there was a report in July, which endorsed information sharing for safeguarding, and is leading to some pilots on using the NHS spine and joining up personal records a lot more. The disappointing thing with that one is it really doesn't join the dots with SEND or other groups. It's really looking at it narrowly for safeguarding, even though, of course, there's this much wider relevance. So next slide, please. And against the backdrop of that is that there is a cross-government commitment to moving towards data sharing and data linkage in order to get better use of the national admin data that we all routinely report, and to make better use of it, and to get richer insights and to enable more early intervention and all of the system improvement that we heard about this morning. So, but at the moment, the different approaches aren't very joined up, and sort of that would really help nationally. So on to the next slide, please. OK, there we go. So that's probably enough by way of background. Are there any questions about that bit? Because I realise we sort of galloped through a whole lot. I will dig out a link to the IG guidance. I can see there's a question there. Otherwise, Garlin, do we want to move on to our little poll?
So you can see we have the Menti code in the corner, so you can scan the QR code, or you can type in menti.com and enter the number, and it will take you up to this poll.
This is just to get a snapshot of how many of you are already linking local authority data sets or health data sets, or across the two.
Good to see so much in development, Anne, isn't it?
Yeah. And yeah, and that's the impression we're getting from our local area research as well. I think a lot of people are working on this.
I think you can't underestimate, and we'll talk this about a little bit, is how difficult it is. And I think part of the work we're doing is trying to help the process. There'll be a toolkit produced from the British Academy of Child with Disability Research, a toolkit to support local areas in linking. So hopefully that will help those of you who are in the journey, because it can be a little bit bumpy.
I've just put a link to the Information Commissioner guidance on data sharing and children there.
Okay, so I'll talk to you a little bit about the FOI that we did. This was to get a picture of what we felt that it was important to get a picture of who was doing what nationally, because as I was doing these two projects in the northeast of England, it just seemed really tricky at some points in time, and it was to really get an understanding of who was doing it and where and what they were doing. I thought that would be a really good way to celebrate and find out from others how they were managing the process, which linked really well to Anne's local area interviews as well. So there's 148 local authorities. We had 95 responses. In the publication, there's 91 reported. The responses are still trickling through. So what you'll see today is based on the 95. And then there's 54. So 38 out of the 54 ICBs responded as well. So what we learned really is the majority of local authorities and ICBs were linking internal data sets. Much more likely in local authorities than ICBs. And it would often be social care, so SIN census with school census data sets from education. And ICBs tend to be linking just their internal healthcare data sets without those external local authority data sets. They were often linking as well data on all children rather than specific groups of children, we found. So we didn't know whether they were linking data for specific initiatives for those groups of children, but it was just seemed to be a more broad at first, just trying to get all data on all children linked as a start point. Worryingly, only 3 local areas reported that were linking the community services data set. So that's a paediatric diagnostic set that Anne referred to earlier. So only 3 at the moment linking that, but also some in development as well. So what we also asked them was why they were linking data. So what was the purpose? Most said it was for strategic planning and data dashboards, and not many at the moment for joint commissioning. Next slide, please. We've got some bar charts to ease this. So how many local authorities and ICBs are linking internal data sets? You can see there it's local authorities. We have quite a few who are doing it or in development, and much, only 7 there who are not yet linking data. Next slide, please. Oh, I don't think it's changed on my screen. There we go. Oh, how many local authorities are linking data for children with SEND? So you can see there that local authorities, the majority, 80, are linking on SEND. What we also don't know in this, you could be linking it, but we don't know about the data quality. So we weren't able to find that out through the FOI. Okay, quite self-explanatory, these here, and these are the reasons. So what are the uses? So when they link the data, what are they linking them for? And you can see there the majority are data dashboards, which I think often, particularly in local areas, is driven by the SEND area inspection, that there's a drive for this. Strategic planning also, as discussed before, but less likely to be for commissioning or targeted interventions at this point. So quite useful really in giving us a sense overall of who's linking which data sets and where, and the fact that the community services data set isn't being linked. And I think we can explore reasons why that might be from the 2 examples, particularly with the Life Start project in Sunderland, South Tyneside. We can share some of the barriers and enablers that we came across in that project. Thank you.
Yeah, turn my microphone on again. So so as well as the FOI to give us a snapshot of what's going on, we did local area research, and it was just interviews with 6 areas reached through contacts and through CDC's networks to find out 3 things really. Why were they linking data? What difference did it make? What were the benefits? And to try and understand what the barriers were and the enablers, what made it easier. So if I just run through that fairly quickly. So the things that these areas said they were using their data for and why they valued it, I summarised under 6 themes here. The first 2 are really about doing that Children and Families Act stuff better. All the aspirations in, I think it's section 25 and 26 about multi-agency working and the duties to work together and to plan together and to commission jointly. Linked data really helps with that. It helps to have a shared understanding. It gives you the data that you need to have a good multi-agency picture to inform this joint working. It also provides some of the detail. So, for example, the understanding the patterns of service use. We had masses of very wide-ranging examples, things like understanding peaks in A&E attendance, who was overrepresented sort of amongst the NEET cohort, who was accessing CAMS and who wasn't, and which bit of it, which children weren't able to access their early years entitlement. But rather than just needing to look at this in terms of single agency data, we can understand, which were the children who were being left out and getting stuck, and which of the children were accessing what they need as well. So giving a much richer, more detailed understanding of what's going on in a cross-cutting way. Then really powerfully and really relevant to everything that was said this morning, particularly that DFE presentation, which is such a familiar and frustrating theme about the need to rebalance the whole system away from the acute end and towards early intervention. the linked data was proving really useful in terms of informing early intervention strategies and targeted responses. So being able to understand pathways in a much more sophisticated way, again, not just in a one-dimensional way. So the early intervention strategies, for example, there were examples of using the data to inform strategies to reduce exclusions, to support the success of mainstream placements, to reduce out of area placements, all really, really important stuff. And then the targeted examples included some using data at individual level. So there's a lovely case study from Bradford who've got a live send data dashboard, and they use that to monitor, their operational managers use that day to day to monitor their vulnerable cohorts, and they have a panel to target support to young people who need that. So that's become an operational tool. In a way that some areas, more areas we think did that during COVID when there was a relaxation in information sharing. But anyway, Bradford have got all of their data sharing agreements in place to be able to carry on with that. And it's really powerful. There was a lovely example from Hartlepool as well, where they are now sharing data, the health data on young children, on infants, and actually antenatally children identified with a disability, so that they can plan ahead on an individual basis for when that child is ready to start early years or primary school and have specialist provision in place for them. So I thought those were quite powerful examples of what you can do by sharing your data. Then the last two here are really about culture and understanding what's going on across the system and having shared ownership and a partnership approach to addressing all the problems. So lots of you will have co-produced outcomes frameworks now. Data linkage can enable you to have, again, much richer cross-cutting data to populate those outcomes frameworks with, and equally to really understand the cohort and to share ownership of both the problems and the solutions. So that's some really rapid examples. Sorry, there was so much in the research, it's hard to summarize it quickly. If we could go on to the next slide, what I would love to do is to hear from any of you, if you're doing this, what have you found useful, and would you be able to share an example of how you've used your data? Don't know if anyone wants to put it in the chat or put their hand up.
Or maybe how you would hope to use the data, because
Yes.
I know a lot of you had it in development. So when it is linked, what are you hoping to use it for? But we have a hand, James.
We'd really like to use the data around attendance. So we know that children who aren't at school for an extended period, that's a risk factor. We think it'd be really helpful if health services knew which children they were when they're planning interventions for them. And that's one example, but we're far away from that. We're trying to figure out the challenge of that unique identifier and how we get that so we can match the data. This is really helpful though.
That's really interesting. Where are you?
We're in Coventry.
Okay, because in London they are working, our colleague Dougal Hargreaves is involved in a project where they are trying to link data to understand school attendance and how that links with mental health and physical health difficulties. So great. I don't know, maybe we should connect you if you want to email afterwards.
That'd be brilliant, thank you.
Amanda?
Sorry, I've managed to turn my camera off, just noticed. Yeah, so we've got better at linking social care and education data. It's probably easier because it's all in-house, but we've developed a system to identify the most vulnerable children through using some of that data and information. The missing bit is getting health involved with that. What we're particularly interested is in, again, the attendance, the anxiety, but a lot of those children and young people then get discharged from health because they don't attend, and we're not aware of who they are quick enough to raise them up the vulnerability scheme of things, if that makes sense. So I think there's that, and we also are working on developing it better to get those early alerts in terms of sufficiency. We've seen a growth in our SLD, PMLD cohort. So it's about getting those earlier alerts from health to being able to plan sufficiency further ahead.
Yeah, so the Hartlepool example might be useful for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you. If there's any more examples, really, this is ongoing work. So if there are more examples that people want to share, or if people want us to put them in touch with other areas that are doing similar things, then just email us and we will try to do that. And we'd love to learn from what you're doing. Garling, could we go on to the next slide, please? Thank you. So the barriers. Sarah will speak about some of the barriers we've been bashing our heads against over the last 18 months. But the barriers from our local area research. A lot of barriers around linking local authority and health data. Now, the people who put their hands up to be part of the research were almost all local authority people, although 2 of them had cross-cutting roles or had only just joined from health. These barriers were very much from the local authority perspective, and I want to do more to hear this, particularly from health as well, because I'm sure it will be a slightly different picture. But the barriers that were highlighted, of course, a lot around health data, so perceptions that there isn't relevant data when there is, a lack of clear national expectation, so a lack of leverage to get data from the provider collaboratives, and all of this being exacerbated by the latest reorganisation as well. Risk-averse attitudes, people are really cautious about sharing children's health data, but when you look at the data, there's a lot of sensitive data in the social care data and education too. And then just sort of incompatible data, different boundaries and age ranges provide extra challenges. Information governance is long and complex and painful, and Sarah will speak more about that. It's also entirely necessary and appropriate, but we're probably not doing it in the most efficient way possible. And that's where it will be really useful to share learning and resources so that everyone isn't having to reinvent the wheel. Lots of data and digital challenges. The consistent identifier is one that really national government could help us with. Data quality in individual data sets, you try and link them and you realise where the holes are and where the inconsistency is, and digital maturity. But we're all on that journey, and I think progress is being made all the time, and all the time it will get easier. Cultural challenges we've already alluded to and are really important, particularly at a time when services feel so underfunded and there's backlogs in provision. You don't necessarily want to share your data showing quite how long waiting lists are and so on, but sharing it does enable others to be part of the solution. And resources, it takes a real, because it's still difficult and it's still new and knowledge is growing, it takes a real investment of time to get through all the IG and to invest in the partnership working like they were talking about this morning, and to build the data and digital capability. Sarah, do you want to say a wee bit, and it might be cathartic, about some of our IG challenges in Sunderland, if we go on to the next slide?
Yeah, so this obviously we will report this in December, and it will be publicly available and free to help other areas do this. So I think the main thing, I'm aware of time, we've only got a few minutes left, has been at the start of the projects going, right, this is what we're going to do, it's important, we're going to link this data, we're going to use North East Commission Support Unit, we've got really good relationships locally, but you don't know all of these acronyms that you're going to hit until you're told that you're going to require them. So iGuard now we had to apply for iGuard. It took about 6 months. iGuard has now disbanded. Having the Data Services Security Protection Toolkit, didn't know we needed that. So we've done it 2 routes. We've done the local route using NECs and local flows of data, and we've also done the national route, and each require different things. Now, you don't know any of this until you actually start to do it. You go, this is great, we're going to get the data in 4 weeks, it's all going to be linked and pseudonymized, and then someone goes, oh, hang on a minute, did you know you need this? And of course you don't know. So I think the barriers is partly that, but also then you go, right, we're going to link the community service data set, and then you find out it's blocked, it's not flowing nationally, and it's not flowing locally. And why is that? And then that has to get unblocked. Unique identifier, we use the NHS number, which in a pseudonymized tool, pseudonymization tool. And then just also local authority data sets. We've got 2 local authorities, they all have different titles and for variables, so they had to be aligned, and then just all of this kind of things lining up, but hopefully the toolkit will help. I think we're on month about 24 now, and we're almost there. It's positive to say at the end. I want to say we are almost there. And I think that's probably enough of Barry's, so I don't want to leave people thinking it's not worth doing.
Yeah. And I know on a previous presentation I've talked about the importance of individuals, and I think Christine and Lorraine did too. But Sarah has just championed this and kept it moving with each blockage. And I think, I mean, like an example is we lost several months due to somebody not forwarding an email. You know, each person, but with these complex partnerships, each person needs to be on board, things need to be signed off, and things have to happen in the right order. So it really takes an individual to champion it, and Sarah's done an amazing job on that. So
well, that's very kind, Anne, but I think also there's a person in every organisation, sometimes more. So I think what we have in the projects I'm working with is a really supportive, local authorities, really supportive commissioning group. Everybody sees the importance of it happening, and it's that commitment from everybody that's kind of driven it. Like, as a collective, we're like, look, there's going to be barriers. We've just got to find a way to work through them, because we want to get to the end point and we've done everything right. And we know that if we're approached, it's been signed off by senior solicitors, and we've got all of that security, knowing that we've followed all the right processes. Because it's pseudonymized the data, but still we've got to be very careful.
Absolutely. That leads me on nicely. I'm looking at the clock and we're almost out of time, but the senior strategic commitment is so important, and if you don't have it, it's nigh impossible. And beneath that, the importance of cross-cutting governance structures came across. So most areas had 3 levels of governance. They sort of had the service leads, and then they had the operational managers, and then they had data working groups doing deep dives. And really importantly, parent carers were plugged into 1 or 2 of those levels, helping to triangulate the data and say, yes, that fits with family carers' experience here, or no, that doesn't, or you need to ask this question instead. So they were very much integral and supportive to that. Where teams and systems have been integrated, life had got easier, data linkage was easier, you know, if things are joined up. And several of the authorities I spoke to had sort of integrated bits of the system as part of this journey, and it had helped. And then a couple of them were actually tiny authorities, and they just had really strong working relationships and knew everyone, and that helped too. So the knowledge of the health data and commissioning and contract management was invaluable. And I expect the same is true the other way around if I'd spoken to more health people. And again, sort of cause for optimism, the prior data linkage experience and capability, there is more of this happening all the time. There's a variety of funds, and the Health and Care Act really encourages this in the adult sector, and in children's social care as well, there's lots of development. So hopefully in all areas, gradually the capability is growing, and through supporting families and troubled families, I guess, as well. So hopefully it will get easier, and there will be more expertise and people just understanding why it's worth doing and how to do it. And we're certainly going to disseminate the sort of learning that we've got as we make progress with this one. So I think we're all out of time, but that was, if there's anything particularly that you think would be helpful, would you pop it in the chat or quickly put your hand up?
I think they're all happy, Anne. I think they're like, yeah, let's go and do it. It sounds brilliant. Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for coming along.
Someone says,
contact details.
Yeah, I didn't put contact details on slides because the slides are being published, but if you email CDC, they'll just put us in touch.
Okay.